Want to shop Walmart Black Friday deals first? Walmart Plus members get early access to our hottest deals. Join now and get 50% off a 1-year annual membership. Shop Black Friday deals first with Walmart Plus. See terms at walmartplus.com.
Whether you're ordering wings for the game, whipping up a 7-layer dip, or ordering pizza, there's something about football that makes you want to eat. And this football season, Uber Eats has the best deals on game day food. No matter what you're craving, from 2-for-1 pizza to buy one, get one wings, Uber Eats will be dropping new deals each week, all season long. Uber Eats, official on-demand delivery partner of the NFL. Order now. Terms and conditions apply. See app for details.
Hey, it's Austin James. Yes, I'm living with diabetes, but it doesn't have to define me. Thanks to the Freestyle Libre 3 Plus sensor, I get real-time glucose readings throughout the day. The Freestyle Libre 3 Plus sensor is small and easy to wear, giving me the freedom to focus on my life as a parent and a musician. Now this is progress. You can get a free sensor at freestylelibre.us.
Offer available for people who qualify. Visit myfreestyle.us to see all terms and conditions. Certain exclusions apply. Data on file. Abbott Diabetes Care. For prescription only. Safety info found at freestylelibre.us.
Hello and welcome to 1865, the Nottingham Forest podcast, and I'm your host, Rich Ferraro. It is Friday, the 29th of November, and this is Friday 5, your weekly roundup of the big stories coming out of the City Ground. And on this occasion, we have a guest reviewer with us, so someone who you may have heard before, but welcome back, Steve Burns.
Thank you for having me back, Rich. It's always a pleasure to be here.
Well, it's great to have you here. And without any further ado, let's go over to the 1865 news desk, where we can be joined by Jamie Martin.
Hi, this is Jamie Martin. I'm back here with this week's top 5 Forest stories from the 1865 news desk. The headline to this week's news: Tom Cartledge has stepped down from his board position. In some shock news this week, Nottingham Forest announced that former chairman Tom Cartledge had stepped down from his position on the board only a month after taking the position following his decision to resign as club chairman. Cartledge, whose vested interests lie in building-related services, left Forest for reasons that concern his need to put more time into his family business. It also comes after reported plans for a stadium move were essentially shunned. Former Labour MP and advisor to the Prime Minister, Michael Dugher, has now taken a position on the board, somewhat replacing Mr Cartledge. Dugher joins at a time where a new Labour government reigns, and especially with local Labour prominence. The second piece of news this week: Ola Aina has been offered a contract extension. Perhaps one of Forest's most consistent players since returning to the top flight, Ola Aina is admired for his quality by Forest fans and neutrals, and now with just months left on his current deal, Forest are poised to keep him at the City Ground for an extended period. According to Italian transfers expert Nico Shearer, Nottingham Forest have officially presented their deal offering to Ola Aina to keep him at the City Ground beyond June 2025. More details and updates are expected very soon. The third piece of news: Forest have voted against new proposed APT rule changes. The Premier League is more divided than ever off the pitch, with lawyers playing an ever increasingly important role in the game. Just recently, a vote went to the clubs over associated party transaction rules related to sponsorship, etc., with Nottingham Forest voting against the proposed changes. APT rules were established to ensure that any sponsors from companies within related ownership are sponsoring a fair market value and not an inflated figure. The most notable change approved was that of integrating interest-free loans from owners to their clubs into APT rules. The Premier League has reiterated that the proposals were made to, and to quote, safeguard the financial stability, integrity and competitive balance of the league. Nottingham Forest, Aston Villa and Manchester City are three of the teams said to have voted against the changes, with Manchester City losing their latest challenge against the Premier League. Now, news piece number 4, Nottingham Forest are using a new technology to identify young players. Nottingham Forest have partnered with Brains First, which uses cognitive testing technology to further develop their analysis of young players, to further bolster the quality of their academy and the techniques used. The club want their youngsters to be good decision makers and believe that by further understanding cognitive learning processes by using technologies such as Brain First, it allows for the academy to better structure the players' environment, sessions, positions and development plans. First teams have used it up and down the country, and now Forest want to add it to their academy, making them one of the first academies to use the technology in the country. Now, the final piece of news, and some rather funny news, Forest rejects funny Ryan Yates contract idea. A funny one to end this week's roundup is a new interview from John Percy, a Telegraph senior sports journalist, reveals that Ryan Yates requested to sign his new contract in a snorkel. As exclusively revealed by the Telegraph, Ryan Yates wanted to continue the long-standing theme around the snorkel. It comes from the chant, "If Yatesy scores, we're in the Trent." And despite his wish to continue that theme, even when signing a new long-term contract to the club, it was ultimately, and very sadly, rejected. The reports also revealed that Yates was close to joining Hull City at one point, even waiting in the car park ready to sign for them, but his fortunes changed. It was fate for sure, and Yates has since cemented himself into a highly competitive squad and further emphasised how important he is to Nottingham Forest, his club of almost 2 decades. Maybe one day we could see him sign his contract in a snorkel. Well, that is all from me this week for the 1865 news and from the 1865 news desk. Be sure to catch up with me on X via the handle @I'm Jamie Martin. Nottingham Forest related news coming your way throughout the week. Take care, and we'll speak to you very, very soon.
Thank you very much, Jamie. And let's get straight into it with you here, Steve. So the first story was something that I don't think anyone really saw coming, was it? Which is that Michael Dugher, the former MP, has joined the board of Forest. Now, I think it's worth pointing out, if you didn't already know, that he is a long-standing Forest supporter. In fact, even before I knew he was an MP, I knew about him being a Reds fan because he was following our Twitter feed many, many years ago. And I've noticed he tweets slightly less about football since leaving politics. Maybe it's because his day job has kept him more busy. I don't know. But the other side of that coin, Steve, is that Tom Cartledge has left the Forest board not too long after he relinquished his position as chairman. Now, reading between the lines, and I am speculating, do you think this suggests that Cartledge's departure as chairman was maybe not as amicable as they made it sound at the time?
It's difficult to know really what's going on behind the scenes, and certainly there have been falling outs with Mr. Marinakis and the rest of the staff there. So we could speculate. I mean, certainly when we think about what's happened in terms of the proposed stadium move and how that went down, and how Mr. Cartledge would have been very much involved in that. There may be things behind the scenes that have contributed to this factor.
Yeah, and I think it's fair. You touched upon the stadium thing. I think it's fair to say that Cartledge blotted his copybook with a lot of Reds fans because he seemed to be the guy who was proposing that should the City Ground redevelopment not happen, that Toton Lane would be a good alternative location. And I mean, who knows? Maybe that's part of what led to his departure from the board as well. Whether potentially, we don't know what's going on, but it could be any number of reasons. It could be maybe there's been a falling out with other people at the club, or maybe that Cartledge just felt, well, if I'm not going to be the chairman and if I'm no longer in that position, then maybe there's not much value for me to add as a board member.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it'd be interesting to see what changes Mr. Dugher brings as he comes in and how he takes that role on. I think it's good as well having another person in the boardroom there that has Forest fandom within his roots. So we'll see how that plays out.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it's not accidental, is it, that Tom Cartledge, as one lifelong Forest fan, leaves the board but is replaced by another lifelong Forest fan.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's move on from there and let's come on to the matters on the pitch. Well, sort of, in that Ola Aina, who, in my opinion, has been, frankly, one of the best players in a red shirt this season, and in fact, one of the best players in a red shirt this whole calendar year. Now, we know his contract is expiring at the end of this season, and the Reds have put an offer on the table if reports are to be believed. And if reports are to be believed, Steve, we want him to sign it, don't we?
Oh, absolutely. I think we'd be stupid to let him go. He's had such an impact on the team. He's been one of the more consistent players. And I think off the pitch as well, you see his character. I'm thinking particularly of that interview he did with the box of Ribena in his hand after he scored that fantastic goal against West Ham. So, it'd be great if he stays. I'd be really, really keen to see him sign a new contract. Yeah,
and in terms of what will make him get over the line, I mean, obviously, we know about player power, and we know that Ola, he's somebody who's kind of well-travelled. He's played for a few clubs. He's gone abroad. We obviously signed him from Italy. He is an international footballer and clearly highly prized by the Nigerian national squad. And Forest had to make a real strong representation to get him released from the Nigeria squad in time for the league programme to resume. And so he's clearly highly thought of at the City Ground. As you mentioned, he's also clearly enjoying his time. You can see that from the little social media snippets. He's obviously mates with Callum Hudson-Odoi, and the both of them get on really well with Anthony Elanga. But there seems to be a real togetherness behind the scenes. And when a player has the possibility of being able to sign for a lucrative contract elsewhere under freedom of contract, all of those things hopefully count in our favour.
Yeah, I think so. When you think that potentially he's, he is a starting player. He's probably one of the first names on the team sheet every week. And so potentially then going to be a smaller fish in a bigger pond may not necessarily be the right move for him as a career. But yeah, I'd be delighted if he stays. I'd be delighted if he re-signs.
Yeah, and also I think the other thing to keep in mind, he's 27 now, so fingers crossed, maybe it might be the case that he'll want to say, I want to settle somewhere for a little while where I am, a part of the furniture, where I have got mates around me. So, who knows? We don't know what's going on in people's heads, but hopefully those factors, he is a human being after all. Let's move on. And this is the story that let's be honest, before we started recording, we were going, This confuses me. So it's a story about the APT rule changes and that Forest are one of the teams who have voted against it. So obviously it's a 16-4 vote amongst the Premier League teams. The other clubs who were on Forest's side of the fence were Newcastle, Villa and Manchester City. And just to repeat what Jamie quoted in his news report, this is all to do with safeguarding the financial stability and the integrity of the Premier League, including things like regulating interest-free loans that are given and converted into equity. So the idea being it levels the playing field. Now, Steve, I'm just going to throw it out there, and I'm not taking sides on the APT thing, but I'm just going to throw it out there. There's no such thing as a level playing field once you're in the game of professional football.
Yeah, and I think when you look at the company that's being suggested with the teams that also voted against this, you look at Newcastle being backed by Saudi Arabia, the Emirati supporting financially Manchester City for many, many years, and the situation at Aston Villa. You do kind of wonder, what is there lurking behind the background in the terms of the way that the club's being invested at the moment, which could be some cause for concern. But then again, I think back to, when we had Farah's refrigeration on the front of the shirt, would have that been one of the things that probably would have come in investigation if these rules were being implemented? So I think time will tell on this one. It'd be interesting to see how this one plays out. And here's hoping it doesn't have a major impact on our finances.
You and I are fans of a certain vintage. We grew up watching Forest in the Clough years. And, Sir Brian was famously a man of integrity and values. He had his idiosyncrasies, but he wanted his teams to play the right way. Yes, he ran the club like a dictatorship, but he also said that he wanted things to be done in a certain way. We were always brought up with Forest being the club with values. So how do you feel about the company that Forest are keeping, bearing in mind they're siding with Megabucks Newcastle, amoral Manchester City, and who knows what with Aston Villa?
I'm going to be very careful about how I answer this, aren't I? I think football is a very, very different world nowadays than it was in the days of Mr. Clough, and obviously money is a hugely important factor. If you look at the issues that we've had around FPP, then clubs have to be financially very, very astute in terms of how they manage and negotiate themselves around the rules. Am I going to cast aspersions against the integrity of some of the other clubs there? Probably not for this podcast, and I probably don't feel equipped to do so. But I think it's just recognising that football is a very different world from it was when you and me were kids.
That seems like a very nice place to stop and take a big, deep breath and maybe a glass of water. So we'll be back in just a minute. Hi, it's Rich here, and thanks, as always, for listening to 1865, the Nottingham Forest podcast. You may have heard that Billy Davies is going to be doing a gig. Yes, he is coming to the Albert Hall in Nottingham in February to talk about his time at Nottingham Forest, and he will be joined by a few familiar faces such as Wes Morgan, Lee Camp and Terry the Kitman. Well, I just want to let you know that we are soon going to have an exclusive giveaway and more details relating to this event, so keep tuned in to 1865, the Nottingham Forest podcast. We'll be telling you more very soon.
Hey, it's Kaylee Cuoco for Priceline. Ready to go to your happy place for a happy price? Well, why didn't you say so? Just download the Priceline app right now and save up to 60% on hotels. So whether it's Cousin Kevin's Kazoo Concert in Kansas City, go Kevin, or Becky's Bachelorette Bash in Bermuda, you never have to miss a trip ever again. So download the Priceline app today. Your savings are waiting. Go to your happy place for a happy price with Priceline's Black Friday sale. Save now and travel later with our best deals of the year. Go to your happy price, Priceline.
You're listening to 1865, the Nottingham Forest podcast.
Welcome back to 1865, the Nottingham Forest podcast, and the Friday Five with me, Rich Ferraro, and him, Steve Burns. And we return to the stories that Jamie brought us earlier, and a really interesting one, and one I have to admit that's kind of new on me, which is Forest are now starting to roll out the brain first technology to use in the academy to spot and to help develop young players in the academy. Now, it seems as though this is cognitive learning technology, and as well as coming up with development plans, it's also supposed to help, along with the human coaching they get, help the players not only develop their skills, but also become better decision makers. Really interesting that, firstly, this technology exists. And of course, we know that the world of sports science has evolved massively, but also that Forest seem to be the first club in the country to try and roll this out at academy level. And I'm assuming this is part of their bid to retain Cat 1 status.
Yeah, and I think it's encouraging that our academy has done so well over the last few years. You think all the players that we've had come through that route, and the way that we'll continue to develop players. If we're taking technology that's already been applied to first teams around the country and then bring it into academy players, then I'm certainly all for that. And again, one of the things that's been very, very key about the way that academy players have been developed is not just their playing skills, but in terms of their character. I think that's always was something very, very important over the last few years with the players we've seen, like Joe Worrell and Matty Cash and obviously Yates that have come through that in terms of the character. So anything that we can do to continue to support the academy development, the way the environment works for them and developing players, I think is a real plus for us.
Yeah, and I guess it's coming back to the whole issue of Forest being a club with values, isn't it? Because over the last 20, 25 years, right back to when Paul Hart was in charge of the academy, while Gary Brazil was looking after young player development, and hopefully still now, it is that emphasis about not just producing fine young footballers, but fine young men. And I think that's something that we should all be very, very proud of. Now, you didn't mention Ryan Yates there, Steve, and this neatly segues into the last story that Jamie brought us. And Yates, he gave an interview to John Percy of The Telegraph. He's the Midlands football correspondent, but he's also a Reds fan. So he must have really enjoyed having the chance to interview the Forest captain. Now, amongst the headlines, just when Aitor Karanka was in charge, Yates, he was almost going to sign on loan for Hull. And if he left at that stage when he hadn't yet broken into the Forest first team, his career could have turned out very, very differently, couldn't it, Steve? And yet, a few months later, Karanka was gone, O'Neill was in charge, and hey there, Yates, he broke into the first team and has never really left.
And now, as a son of the East Coast and being born in Hull, I'm not going to have a bad word said against the city. But yeah, I think Hull's loss was definitely our gain. I've always been so impressed with Yatesy, with the amount of work that he's put in, the amount of effort he's put in, and how he's constantly seemed to prove the doubters wrong, and now is very much a mainstay of our midfield and continuing to go for strength. I don't know if people have had a chance to catch the interview that he gave with Martin O'Neill at the end of the Leicester City game, but just the way that Martin spoke about him so warmly, and he was very much like a proud parent stood next to him. So clearly he's a player with character. He's clearly well liked by the club, and I applaud him for his efforts and the way he continues to serve us.
Yeah, and once again, an example of him being not just you can say what you like about him as a footballer, but he comes across as a fine young man. He comes across as somebody who really, he knows he's worked hard to get where he is. He knows how lucky he is to have, a seat at the top table. And he also is trying to use those things for good. So he gets involved with all the community activity. He doesn't, as far as we know, no controversies off the pitch that we're aware of. He is the guardian of the club coffee machine, and he sometimes, when the club barista isn't there, he's the one who'll make the drinks for other people. And then, just to prove that he is, very aware of what's going on with fans, he's talked about how sometimes when you're under the cosh from the fans, that it affects you mentally. But then when the good times come, after the if Yates scores were in the Trent, he did the swimming actions at Wembley. He did that at the end of last season, and when he signed a new contract, he actually put forward the idea that his publicity photo would be taken of him emerging out of the Trent, wearing a snorkel, holding his contract in his hand. I think for the sake of his health, we should probably be glad that the club said no.
We should be, but it would have been very funny. Let's be quite honest. And it's nice to see a down-to-earth player with a good sense of humour. And all the best to him.
I'm just remembering that when Michael Dawson had broken through and he was on the verge of being named club captain in his first spell, and he got laid out with glandular fever, and it took him most of the season to recover. So if we'd lost Yatesy to dysentery, bearing in mind what's happened to Sangare and Danilo since, it wouldn't have been good, would it? So good
No,
on you, Yatesy.
definitely not.
And just time for a couple of other lines. As you'll have heard during the advertising break, it seems as though former Forest manager Billy Davies is coming out of hibernation. Nearly 10 years, I think, after he left the City Ground for the second time, he is daring to show his face in Nottingham. He's going to do an audience with type evening at the Albert Hall in February. And at the time of recording, tickets have just gone on sale at £50 a pop or £75 for a hospitality ticket. And with a meet and greet involved, we're going to have more news about that coming up very, very soon. But I don't know, Steve, are you tempted?
I'll be quite honest, no. And the reason I say that is because I've come across this YouTube interview that's been released this week, all 2.5 hours of Billy Davies, which I think is probably more Billy Davies than most people actually need. I think maybe at £75 a pop, I'll maybe give that one a miss if that's okay. And
I mean, has time changed your view about Billy's impact at the City Ground at all? Have you? I think the general consensus is that the first spell was really good and the second spell was quite painful.
I think that's a very, very fair assumption of King Billy's reign. He clearly was a man who wanted more responsibility and demanded more leadership within the club. When we talk about coming back for unfinished business, which never seemed to get finished. He's a manager, I think, that leaves a slightly mixed taste in the mouth looking back on his achievements. I mean, certainly his achievement of keeping the club up for the first season he was in charge, and then taking us to third into the playoffs, where unfortunately we lost to Swansea. That was a superb achievement in terms of those couple of seasons. Obviously something soured there in terms of the ownership, and it was a very different case second time round.
Yeah, it certainly was. I think let's leave that one there. As I say, we'll have more details about the evening with Billy Davies to come in future podcasts. So fans, if you're interested in attending that one, stay tuned. Let's move on, and we'll just take a few minutes to preview the weekend's match against Ipswich before we talk about Nuno's press conference and potential team news. Steve, I mean, we've been talking, in general terms about the Premier League and about how Forest have made a good start, but then also about actually, is the bottom half of the table fairly weak? Is it looking like the three who came up are going to go down again? How would you assess Ipswich's start and their squad?
I think it kind of draw a lot of parallels for when Forest came up. I think they're very, very similar clubs in terms of ethos and in terms of character. I was chatting to an Ipswich fan earlier on today, and he says, nobody was prepared for them doing back-to-back promotions. The squad certainly didn't have the depth or strength that it needed to come up into the Premier League, and they've made some good acquisitions, but they certainly haven't got the depth that they feel that they need to survive and to thrive within the Premier League. And again, I think like Forest in their first season up, there's really that back against the wall mentality of the siege mentality that we certainly had at the City Ground, which is, we're here, we're going to make the most of it, and we're going to try our best as fans to keep the club up by just sheer volume, if nothing else. And that's certainly the case at Ipswich as well. I think one of the real advantages that Ipswich have is that Kieran McKenna is clearly a very, very gifted manager. Unlike the situation with Burnley last season, where they decided to play one style of football and stick to it, he's very adaptable. And again, my friend I was speaking to, the Ipswich fan, was saying that he strongly believes that he's the real deal and that McKenna one day will be managing a top flight club. They've made some good acquisitions, but like I said, I don't think there's all the strength and depth through the team. So who knows? Who knows what's going to happen? McKenna's managed to improve pretty much every player that's come through the team. They've generally tended to do better towards the second half of the season as his coaching starts to sink in. So I think they've got the potential that they could stay up, but I suppose it all just depends on whether they've got the strength and depth going through towards the end of the season.
Yeah, and I think what's always a difficulty, the risk of stating the blooming obvious, is keeping goals out at one end and scoring them at the other. I think as they play three at the back, I would hope that Forest would stick with their usual 4-2-3-1. Obviously, they abandoned it partly due to availability of players last week, and it didn't go well against Arsenal. But with Ipswich playing three at the back, I would be confident that if there's a bit of service, then the wingers can really get in behind the wing backs. And then at the other end, of course, Liam Delap, he really does look like the real deal, in fairness, doesn't he?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and I think one of the problems for Ipswich, and again, going back to strength and depth, is that obviously you've got Delap up front, Amari Hutchinson, who looks an absolute handful, and certainly against Manchester United last weekend, looked fantastic. Unfortunately, they've got George Hurst, who's their second choice striker, who's injured at the moment. And then Al Hamad, I can't even say his name, Al Hamamadi, who was, I think he was brought in from Watford. Again, he was pretty much a League One striker, and they were looking for a third striker as they came into the season. Unfortunately, weren't able to find one. So essentially, they've got a League One striker as their third choice, player. Who even managed to get on the pitch against Manchester United briefly. So, yeah, there are weaknesses at the back as well. I think with Leif Davis wanting to push up and to attack, that obviously leaves space in behind, and that could give an opportunity for somebody like Anthony Elanga just to kind of run into that space and hopefully exploit it on Saturday.
And of course, Anthony Elanga, he got crocked at Arsenal. So Nuno has said in the pre-match press conference that they'll need to assess him. Doctors are taking care of Anthony. He came out of the last match with a very painful situation, but he didn't specify which bit of him was painful. Gibbs White and Anderson and Danilo will be assessed. I don't believe that Danilo is going to be in contention, which is what the suggestion might be. But certainly it would be good if we can have at least one of Gibbs, White or Anderson back, wouldn't it? But if not, would you give Jota a go in the number 10?
I think we've clearly missed, the skills that we have from both Anderson and from Morgan. I think if we were in the situation that both of those were missing, then I would look for starting Jota in there, just because we need that kind of creativity in that number 10 space. I think with the three that we played in midfield against Arsenal, then we just didn't have that cutting edge, forward-looking capability within those three midfielders. Granted, we also came up against, Saka and Odegaard that were just unplayable last weekend, and that completely changed the perspective of the whole match. So yeah, I would like to see Jota if those other two aren't available. I think it could be interesting to see how that would actually give us some different edge and some different attack there.
And if Alanga's cropped, I wouldn't mind seeing Ramon Sosa, who, from the little we've seen of him, I think that he looks like potentially the most kind of old-fashioned winger out of the, along with Alanga, in terms of having that ability, just wanted to get the ball and run at people.
Oh yeah, and that shot that he took at the end of the West Ham game, I think if that hadn't been saved by Fabianski, I think we'd be talking goal of the season contenders already there. I mean, that was just a superb bit of vision and technique. It's just a shame the goalkeeper got in the way.
Well, yeah, and it was a fine shot, fine save. The other thing that, of course, Nuno did want to mention is that with regards to the last couple of matches, we've gone from having a very strong defensive record, and now we've conceded 6 goals in 2 matches. I think the obvious caveat is, as you said, Arsenal were very, very good, and we were never, it's always going to be a struggle to be at their level. And Newcastle controlled the game. They're 2 very good teams.
I came away from the Newcastle game chatting through with my family and saying, well, look, this is the best team that we've seen at the City Ground all season. They were head and shoulders above Forest. I just think it's crazy when you look at some of the results that have been over the last few weeks. It feels a bit like the Championship where anybody can beat anybody at the moment, which is, exciting for the fans. But again, Arsenal, absolutely superb last weekend, played us off the pitch. And, we are going to come across teams like that from time to time that, we have an off day, they have an on day, and that's the situation you end up with.
And it would certainly be nice if Nuno can keep up his record of remaining undefeated and mostly winning against promoted clubs since he's taken over at Forest. So we hope that happens, and we hope that Forest can get a nice, handsome victory. Although, to be honest, when you've lost a couple on the trot, you'll just take the proverbial 1-0 with the ball going in off the defender's arse, wouldn't you?
Oh, absolutely. Always my favourite type of goal.
And that seems like a nice place to leave it. So I want to say thank you very much to you, Steve, also to Jamie for providing us with the news bulletin, and also to you, listener, for joining us once again. Just another reminder that we'll have more about the Billy Davies event, and we will be announcing a bit more about that in our podcast in the next week or so. So keep it tuned to 1865 in all the usual places, and you can find all of our links at 1865.football. We'll be back with our report after the Ipswich match, and until then, come on you Reds.
Thank God this isn't live.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
%8 of the work week is spent communicating, so it's important your team does it well. Enter Grammarly. Grammarly's AI helps teams communicate clearly the first time. It shows you how to make words resonate with your audience, helps with brainstorming, and lets you instantly create and revise drafts in just one click. Join over 70,000 teams and 30 million people who use Grammarly to move work forward. Go to Grammarly.com/enterprise to learn more. Grammarly. Enterprise-ready AI.